The library had been standing long enough to forget most of the people who had walked through it. That was what Raymond Achebe used to say, back when Walter Osei was 22 and didn't know yet how much he didn't know. Raymond would say it while they walked the building together on Sunday evenings, when the students were gone, and the only sounds were the mechanical groans of a structure settling into another week. He said it without sentimentality. He said it the way you might note that a river runs downhill. It was simply a property of the thing. Raymond had maintained Wethersfield University's Alderman Library for 29 years when Walter arrived as his apprentice. He was 61, lean, and unhurried in every motion. He didn't walk a hallway. He read it. He would stop without warning and press 2 fingers against the wall, or stand for a full minute in a corridor with his eyes half closed, listening. Walter had thought, in those first months, that Raymond was simply old, that the pauses were age slowing him down. It took about a year before Walter understood that the pauses were the entire point. Raymond retired in 1991 and left Walter 3 things: the building, a handshake, and a black 3-ring binder with Alderman written on the spine in red marker. The binder contained 29 years of observations, not formal maintenance reports, but running record of the building's behavior, written in Raymond's careful hand on yellow legal paper. Dates, patterns, things that had changed and things that had stayed the same, small things that didn't belong in official reports because they hadn't broken anything yet. Walter had read that binder more times than he could count. He had kept his own version ever since. Alderman Library had been built in 1961, at the beginning of an era when universities believed that size was the same as seriousness. It was a large building, 6 floors plus a sub-basement, made of poured concrete and faced with limestone that had gone from cream to gray over the decades. It sat at the northwest corner of Wethersfield's main campus, bordered on one side by an elm corridor and on the other by the slope to the faculty parking lot. The first expansion came in 1978, when the university added a full 4th floor and a new west wing, built quickly during a flush period with a slightly mismatched quality that additions always carry when they arrive 17 years after the original. Walter knew this building the way you know a person you've worked alongside for 34 years. He knew its sounds at different hours. He knew which doors swelled in wet weather. He kept all of it in the same kind of binder Raymond had left him. Green cover instead of black, same yellow paper, same careful hand. It was a conversation between him and the building, ongoing, unfinished, the way conversations with anything you care about always are. The 4th floor had always had a quality Walter couldn't quite name. It wasn't that anything was obviously wrong. It was more that the 4th floor felt heavier, not in the air. In the floor itself, there was a give to the tiles in the central reading room that you felt in your knees if you walked it often enough. Not a bounce, not a sag, a give. The way good hardwood sometimes yields slightly underfoot before the subfloor takes the weight. Except the 4th floor wasn't hardwood. It was poured concrete with composite tile, and that kind of floor didn't give. Raymond's binder had a note from 1981. 3 years after the expansion, Astor's 4th floor central section, flecks and tiles near the east reading tables. Not structural movement. Possibly inadequate cure time on the pour or variation in slab thickness across the bay. Worth monitoring. Have marked reference points on 3 tiles with a grease pencil. Will check annually. Asterisk. Below it, in 1987, Astor's floor flex in East Bay stable. No change. Considering it a baseline characteristic of this section, asterisk. And in 1989, the line Walter had carried inside him for 34 years. Asterisk note for whoever comes after me. The east bay of the 4th floor central reading room has a slight flex in the slab. It has been present since at least 1981. It has not worsened in 8 years. But don't stack weight there. The floor doesn't like it. Asterisk. Walter checked those tiles every year. He had his own reference points. 3 tiles he had redrawn Raymond's grease marks on when the flooring was replaced in 1997, and again in 2011. Each year, he would go to those 3 tiles and press down on them slowly with both hands. He could feel the difference between those tiles and the one 6 feet west. It was small. It was consistent. It had never changed. In the spring of his 34th year at Alderman, it changed. He felt it on a Tuesday in March, during his weekly walk of the 4th floor. He pressed his hands to the first reference tile and knew immediately that something was different, not dramatically, but the flex was deeper than the week before. He moved to the second reference tile. Same. He spent 10 minutes on his hands and knees in the East Bay, working his way across the floor in a slow grid, pressing with his palms, and then standing and walking and feeling the give through his boots. It was worse near the east wall. That was new. He got out his notebook and wrote down what he felt and where. Then he took out the marble he carried in his left jacket pocket, a small blue cat's eye he'd started using after reading a reference to it in Raymond's notes, and placed it on the center tile of the East Bay. It rolled east. It always rolled east. He knew that. He said it again and watched how far it traveled before stopping. He marked the distance in his notebook. Then he went downstairs to his office and pulled up the university's internal announcements page. The headline was dated the previous Thursday. Alderman Library Digitization Project. Major announcement. Wethersfield University's groundbreaking initiative to digitize its entire physical archive collection will begin relocation of archive holdings on April 15th. Approximately 40,000 boxes of bound and catalog materials currently housed in sub-basement storage will be transferred to fourth-floor shelving to facilitate the installation of server infrastructure in the sub-basement. Walter read it twice. Then he looked at the wall for a moment. Then he opened his notebook and wrote, April 15th. 40,000 boxes, 4th floor, East Bay. He underlined East Bay twice. He went to see Patricia Hume, the facility's director, on a Wednesday morning. She was a careful administrator, organized, fair, and perpetually overworked. Walter sat across from her desk and told her about the 4th floor. He explained the flex, the reference tiles, the change in March, the marble. He put Raymond's binder on the desk and opened it to the 1989 entry. He explained that the binder represented 46 continuous years of observation on this building, including 19 years Raymond hadn't lived to see. Patricia listened. She was good at that. Walter, I appreciate you bringing this. But the digitization project went through facilities review in December. The 4th floor shelving was engineered to university load specifications. The specifications are based on the floor's rated capacity, Walter said. I'm asking whether the floor's actual condition was assessed before those specifications were set. We had a standard inspection before the project was approved. Walter nodded. He knew what a standard inspection was. It was a walkthrough, a check of visible surfaces. It was not someone on their hands and knees in the East Bay with marble and 34 years of comparative data. He didn't say that. He said, I'd ask that someone look at the East Bay specifically before the boxes go up. Patricia made a note. She was not dismissive. She was a competent person with 19 other things happening simultaneously. Walter understood the difference. It didn't change what he felt in that floor. The boxes began arriving on April 15th. There were 41,000 and some hundreds of them. They were being loaded onto the 4th floor shelving in rows that started at the west wall and worked east. At 200 per day, the East Bay would receive its first boxes sometime around the 3rd week of May. Walter checked the floor every Monday. The 2nd week of April, no change from his March reading. 3rd week, the flex near the first reference tile was marginally softer. Not much, enough to note. He wrote it down. Then a structural engineer named Marcus Webb arrived at the building. Patricia had followed through. Webb walked the 4th floor for 35 minutes, bounced on his heels at several points, produced an instrument Walter didn't recognize, and took readings at 5 locations on the east side. He told Patricia, in Walter's presence, that the floor was within acceptable tolerances and that the noted flex was consistent with normal variation in mid-century concrete construction. Walter asked him whether he was aware of the 1978 construction records for the East Bay. Webb said the records he had reviewed indicated standard construction practices for the period. Walter asked whether those records included the subcontractor change that had occurred partway through the pour. Webb looked at him. What subcontractor change? Raymond's binder, page 47. He found the entry that night, though he had known it was there before he looked. He had read this binder so many times that it lived in him as much as on the page. The note was from October 1979, 14 months after the expansion was completed. Asterisk ran into Garvey Prentice at the hardware store. He was a secondary foreman on the 78 expansion. He told me something I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Apparently, the east bay of the central reading room caused problems during the pour. The primary contractor had a pump failure partway through the eastern section. The crew tried to finish the pour in stages rather than lose the day, which you're not supposed to do. Cold joints in a structural slab are a problem because the two pours don't bond properly. The foreman approved it anyway because they were behind schedule. The decision was never formally documented. The building inspector passed a slab. The floor has been there a year and nothing's happened. Garvey says the staging was minor and probably fine. But he thought I should know, and I think I should write it down. If this floor ever gets really heavy use or significant point loading, someone should look at the east bay properly before they commit to it. Asterisk. Walter sat in his office for a long time after rereading that entry. The building had been carrying this since 1978. Raymond had written it down in 1979. Walter had carried it for 34 years without ever having a reason to use it. He had a reason now. He went back to Patricia Hume the following morning with the binder open to page 47. He explained what Raymond had recorded. He explained cold joints. He explained that a subcontractor decision that was never formally documented meant that Webb's review of the construction records was necessarily incomplete because the relevant information was never in those records. Patricia read Raymond's entry twice. Her expression shifted. The shift Walter recognized when something moved from the category of manageable concern into a different category entirely. She called the project team in Denver that afternoon. What followed was not fast. The project team dispatched their own structural engineer, Dr. Elaine Forsyth, from a firm in Chicago, to conduct an independent assessment. She arrived in the second week of May, when 3,000 boxes had already been loaded onto the west and central sections of the floor. The East Bay question was still moving through institutional machinery. Forsyth spent 2 full days on the 4th floor with ground-penetrating radar equipment and a core sampling tool. She extracted 4 cores from the East Bay slab, leaving 4 small circular cuts in the tile. She examined them in the 3rd floor conference room, which she had commandeered as a temporary workspace. Walter was not invited to the examination. He understood, but he was the one who emptied the conference room trash every evening, and he saw the photographs she had taped the window for lighting. Even from across the room, even without training in this discipline, he could see that 2 of the 4 cores showed a visible line through their cross-section that the other 2 did not. The cold joint, right there in the concrete, 46 years old, exactly where Raymond had said to look. He went home that night and sat on his porch for a long time. Dr. Forsyth's report came 3 days later. Patricia called Walter into her office on a Thursday afternoon and closed the door. The East Bay slab had 2 significant cold joint inclusions in the structural section, incomplete bonding that would have been caught by more thorough inspection in 1978. For decades, under normal use, the slab's overall configuration had compensated. That was why 46 years had passed without incident. But the planned archive boxes, concentrated on shelving units in the east section, would have applied point loading at an order of magnitude above anything in the floor's history. The cold joint inclusions ran partially beneath 2 of the 6 planned shelving column bases. Under that load, the slab would have undergone progressive differential settlement. Forsyth's report used a phrase Patricia read aloud. Not suitable for proposed loading without remediation. The boxes would not be going to the East Bay. The archive relocation would be reconfigured to the West Wing secondary stacks. Remediation of the East Bay slab was estimated at $640,000. The project delay was estimated at 7 months. Patricia told him all of this carefully, watching his face. When she finished, Walter nodded. Raymond wrote it down in 1979, he said. I know, Patricia said. He asked someone to look. I know, Walter. There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable. The 4th floor was closed to the archive project, while engineering designed the remediation. A temporary barrier was erected across the central reading room, separating the East Bay, and yellow indicators were placed at each of the 4 core sample patches in the tile. Walter kept walking the floor on his Monday rounds. He stood a barrier and looked at the East Bay, the tile with its 4 small cuts, The east wall where the shelving had been, the windows letting in afternoon light from the elm corridor side. He pressed his hand against the barrier post and thought about Raymond standing here in 1979, having just heard from Garvey Prentice, writing it down because that was the only thing available to him. He thought about the weight of knowledge, how it had nowhere to go unless someone kept it moving, how a note on yellow paper in 1979 could sit in a binder for 46 years, passing from one pair of hands to another, waiting for the moment it mattered. The building had expressed that secret year after year in the barely perceptible give of 3 reference tiles, in a marble rolling east, in a quality Walter had felt since his first year and never been able to fully name. The building had been trying to say something. Raymond had heard it first. Walter had listened for 34 years after. Dr. Forsythe came back in June to oversee the initial remediation. She ran into Walter on the 4th floor on her second morning. "You're the one who flagged the original concern," she said. "Not a question. A former caretaker flagged it first. In 1979. The binder, Patricia showed me. She had steady, direct eyes. How long have you been keeping records like that?" "Since 1991. Raymond left me his, and I continued. 68 years of continuous building observation." She said it slowly, recalibrating something. "We use remote monitoring systems now. Sensors. Software. They're good. They catch things we couldn't catch before." A pause. "They weren't here in 1979 when Garvey Prentice talked to a caretaker in a hardware store." Walter said nothing. "The sensor array we're installing for the remediation monitoring will produce data," she said. "I'd like someone who understands this building's baseline to look at it, not just the automated alerts. Someone who knows what normal looks like here. I retire in 6 months." "I know." She handed him a card. "If you'd walk my team through what you know before that happens, everything in your records, everything in Raymond's, the things that aren't in official reports, I would appreciate it." He took the card. That afternoon, he went back to his office and pulled out the green binder and a fresh sheet of yellow paper. He wrote the date at the top. He wrote, "Asterisk 4th floor, East Bay. Remediation commenced. Cold joint inclusions confirmed at positions consistent with R. Achebe's 1979 report. Forsythe team on site. Asterisk." He paused and then added, asterisk, Raymond was right. He knew before anyone asked him, asterisk. He set down his pen and looked out the window. The elm corridor was in full leaf, throwing moving shadow across the limestone face of the building. Somewhere above him, for floors up, a crew was preparing to repair a flaw present since before Walter was old enough to drive, a flaw that held, quietly, in the dark interior of a concrete slab, for 46 years. Not a failure, not a collapse, just a flaw, patient and hidden, waiting for the weight that would finally test it. The building had held it. Raymond had written it down. Walter had carried it. That was all it amounted to, really. Someone paid attention and passed it on, and someone else paid attention and passed it on again. And when the moment came, when the boxes were rolling in and the project team was confident and the timeline was fixed, the record was there. The building had been trying to say something since 1978. In the end, it had been heard. The remediation took 8 months instead of 7. It read, asterisk the identification of the 1978 construction anomaly prior to project. Loading was made possible by 46 years of continuous observational records maintained by facility caretakers Raymond Achebe and Walter Osei. These records, kept outside the formal facilities management system, contained information unavailable in any official construction or inspection documentation. The Alderman Library maintenance journals represent an unusual and valuable form of institutional building knowledge, and this firm recommends their formal preservation as part of the university's facilities archive. Asterisk. The university is going to digitize both binders, Patricia said. Raymond's and yours. They'll be part of the permanent facilities record. He looked up. They'll be in the archive. In Alderman's archive, she said. In a building they helped keep standing. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the elm corridor was waking into April, the first green at the tips of branches, the light beginning its seasonal change. He thought about Raymond in a hardware store parking lot in 1979, listening to a foreman named Garvey Prentice. He thought about yellow paper and careful handwriting, and a black binder passed from one pair of hands to another. He thought about a blue marble rolling east every year, patient as the building itself. Some knowledge doesn't appear in reports, but sometimes, if someone writes it down carefully enough and passes it to someone who understands how to carry it, it finds its way into the record after all. The fourth floor held. The building remembered. And Walter Osei closed his green binder and set on the shelf, and the elm corridor light moved across the limestone face of Alderman Library the way it always had, across something that had learned to stand long enough to be worth remembering.